Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. In the union budget presented earlier this year, the centre allocated just 73,000 crore rupees for the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act program, better known as NREGA. This was a massive 25.51% less than the revised estimate for the previous financial year. It is estimated that the allocation is only 0.29% of the GDP and 1.85% of total government expenditure for this financial year. World Bank researchers have said that for NREGA to run robustly, its allocation must be at least 1.6% of the GDP. The result of this underallocation? The centre owes more than 4,722 20 crore rupees as NREGA dues to 13 states and union territories, with West Bengal's dues the highest at rupees 2,620.87 crore. This is a huge backlog that has sparked worker protests in Delhi. Meanwhile, widespread unemployment has led to increased demand for NREGA jobs. Why is NREGA so critical to India? Is the government truly interested in keeping it going? And what happens next to it?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show Anuradha Talwar, a well known trade union activist who works with rural labor. She is involved with the Paschim Bongo Khet Majur Samiti, a non party registered union of agricultural workers and its fraternal organizations. She's also involved with the Paschim Bongo Cha Majur Samiti for tea plantation workers and the Shramjeevi Mahila Samiti, a mass organization of working rural women. Anuradha works actively on gender and labor issues. Welcome, Anuradha.
Hello, Ashraf. Good to be on your show.
Thanks so much for making the time. Anuradha, when Narendra Modi first campaigned to be PM, he called NREGA a quote unquote living monument of the UPA's failure. Subsequently, he's been forced to keep it going in the face of poor economic management, which in turn has led to greater demand for NREGA jobs. The number of households that demanded work under NREGA rose from 1.64 crore in 2015 to 3.07 crore in 2022, the centre told Parliament. Why is this happening?
Well, firstly, this particular quote of Narendra Modi's is the most famous quote about NREG, living monument of the UPA's failure. So, but if actually these figures, what the figures that you're talking about, which are true actually, that the number of people demanding NREG has almost doubled since he's come into power in 2015, then actually this is a living monument to his failure also. Because you see, the point is that if you look at the kind of development that is happening, basically we are having development where the Ambanis and Adanis of the world, rather of India, are doing very well. So you have Ambani earning 90 crores of rupees per hour during the COVID crisis, and 24% people losing their jobs at that time. Similarly, Adani's wealth in the last couple of months, it's amazing how it's been increasing.
I think he's crossed Ambani actually in total wealth.
Yeah, he's crossed Ambani now, and it's been absolutely amazing. It's huge. The figures look, absolutely frightening. So, but the other side of the coin for this is that there are more and more loss of jobs. So there's been CMI data recently on unemployment rates, and they've said that it's 7.7% on the whole, or say 8%. And for urban areas, it's 9.4%, which means 1 in every 10 persons in urban India is unemployed at the moment. And if you take certain states like Haryana, which has 27%, which means almost 1 in every 3 persons, and other states like Bihar, Tripura, etc., is 1 in every 5 persons. So there's huge unemployment on the other hand. The result of this is, this very huge number of demand that you're seeing for NREG increasing. And this will happen if you trivialize programs of the poor as being raveries and as sort of useless. If you have development which doesn't look at the poor, then programs like NREG become more and more essential for people to exist. And we've had continued rural distress. We are having droughts and floods this year again. We're having export of wheat has been stopped because wheat production is low. Paddy sowing this season has been less than what it was supposed to happen. And so in this way, we're looking at reduced food stocks. So distress is continuing. Rural distress especially is continuing. And so it's not just during the COVID period. Even after COVID, we've recently, the Right to Food campaign to which I belong, has done a hunger watch study all over India, which was in December last year, which is well after the COVID lockdown and all that. And still 60-70% families were reporting hunger, lack of food, missing meals, all that. And then the other sign that you have of this distress, which is showing up in the figures that you're talking about, is of women entering NREGA. Families are becoming two-worker families. It's no longer a one person supporting the whole family kind of a thing. Everybody who's an adult, even children, sometimes 13, 14-year-olds are working, and women are definitely increasingly getting into NREGA and trying to find income through that. So this would kind of explain the kinds of figures that you're saying, and it shows very, very massive failure on the part of this government also to do anything about sort of people's distress, poverty, all that in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned wheat production. We banned exports, like you said, after promising to export to the world and feed the world, quote
right.
unquote. And now I think just a couple of days ago, there was a report that we might, in fact, even have to import wheat to meet demands. That's the level of
And
hunger.
paddy is also in a mess.
Paddy is in a mess, no doubt. Yeah, MSP has been an ongoing issue. Anyway, those are, I think, separate episodes by themselves. But
yes.
could you tell us about the period after the COVID lockdown when NREGA was restarted? What was the demand like? And could you, I know you've already mentioned some of the factors that spurred it, but if you could kind of detail that more.
Yeah, so people were like desperate for work, and it was a very strange time for us also. We had to work on the phone, which we've never done before. We're so much used to having meetings and working with people. We had to work on the phone, and it was amazing the number of people who kept calling up. And so there was this huge distress because of the lockdown, and then this huge distress because of migrant workers wanting to come back. So you have people in Kolkata who were hosiery workers whose factories closed down, who were desperate to go home. We had people returning from Kerala, Tamil Nadu. We had people whom we had never met, just over the phone, from Uttar Dinajpur, North 24 Parganas, who'd been working in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, who came back. There was a whole group of people who were working in Mumbai as contract laborers, construction workers, who came back. And all these people were seeking work under NREGA. So this kind of, this immediately, there was a huge increase in the demand for NREGA work. And it was basically, just basically desperation. Distress, desperation, which led to people searching for this work and trying to sort of survive in some way or the other through whatever they could get. Because there was nothing else to do at that time. And it was very fortunate that the government, after some time, it took them some time. I mean, even NREGA was locked down, but after some time, they started saying, okay, you can wear masks and start doing work. And some work restarted and all. So in that time, people really went all out to get any kind of work they could get under the scheme.
Yeah, but that's the sign of the desperation that you are talking about. Yeah, but so let me talk about another desperate moment, demonetization. There was a surge after that too, because the move severely impacted the rural economy.
So, yeah, there was a surge after that also. It was, I wouldn't say it was a rural surge. Again, it was basically, rural India, people are basically working in cities. There are a whole lot of migrant workers who actually send back money. So it was these people who kind of, again, because of the demonetization, again, there were factories closing down. There's been a huge closure of small and middle enterprises due to demonetization and then due to COVID. So there's been a lot of unemployment created at the lower end of the scale because of this. And the same thing again recurred in demonetization, what we've talked about earlier, with people seeking jobs and seeking NREGA work. And again, you had this spike at that time for, in December, January, I think it was December 2016, January 2017, and which went on for a couple of months, where there was this spike in demand for work because, again, there was this distress because of demonetization.
Now, you work very closely with rural workers and especially those who avail of NREGA. Could you detail for our listeners what role the program plays in their survival? I mean, essentially, if you could put in a nutshell why such a program is so important for a country like India.
See, first I'll put forward the issue of women. So, like, I work in West Bengal. And in West Bengal, there are certain parts of the country where women did not traditionally work. They never used to go for work in the fields, even for paid work. But with NREGA coming in, we see more and more women going into work. And it's actually in many states, it's majorly a women's program. So it's one way, it's a very good way of getting women to come into the wage market and to receive some money at least in their hands. So from that point of view, it's very
especially
good.
At a time when labor force participation of women is very, very low.
Yes, very low. So at that time, it plays an important role. The second thing that has happened is that women, there's this whole thing of equal wages in NREGA, which is not there in rural India. Rural India always has women's wages have been about 70% of male wages. So in many places where NRG has worked successfully, the idea that men and women should get equal wages has found acceptance. And so that has also made a lot of difference. Then also you have other things like, for example, migration. Migration, especially in 2009-10, that was the beginning of the act. And when it first became full-fledged, it was, it started in few districts first and then as a pilot, and then gradually it went to all districts in India. So 2009, 10, 11, at that period, I remember, it had a very good impact on migration. So, like, for example, we work in Purulia district. In Purulia district, there was this habit that people had. It was called Lama Le Jawa. So they every kind of season, whether harvesting and sowing, people used to lock up their houses and go to the neighboring districts of Bardhaman, Hooghly, etc., to work as agricultural workers. That stopped. People stopped going there. We have a very close friend who used to be a painter, who used to have to migrate every year to do work. He started staying at home. So it was very obvious that this was having an impact. Then even from other areas, like for example, Barwani in Madhya Pradesh, we have a sister fraternal organization that works there, fraternal union. They were telling us that even for them at that time, the whole migration thing stopped. And also people, the issue of debt also became less. Workers were less and less in debt to the money lenders because they had the NREJ work available. But this is something which is, which is of the past. It's not a very, now you see a very kind of a worse situation now. These are the positive things that happened right in the beginning. This is not happening now. But anyway, on the whole, for us, for example, and for many other people who work amongst rural labor, it was a very good way of getting people together, of organizing for other rights also. And for, and that is very, because rural labor is scattered, you'll have one person working for one farmer and maybe another farmer at another time. So there's no kind of clear employer-employee relationship. And there are very few laws around which you can organize. For example, I work with tea garden workers. There are dozens of things one can do with them because there are a lot of laws that apply to them. With rural workers, that doesn't happen. So NREJ gave us something to hold on to. For people who wanted to go into rural areas, organize rural workers, try and see that they get other rights also, and that the distress decreases. NREJ became a very important way, and it still is a very important way of organizing rural workers. So, that is kind of something to do with my trade union work. That is a perspective from which I would think it is a very important thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. I've always held that NREJ has more than an economic impact. It actually has a very large social impact, which you've kind of detailed.
In fact, today I would say that the other impact is becoming more and more important than the economic impact. Economically, it's doing pretty badly, actually.
So I had two questions, but I'm going to combine them because I've kind of touched upon the first one a little earlier, where I said what kind of dues are pending with the center. I kind of detailed some of that. But in that context, given what you have said, how does the withholding of dues impact poor people directly?
So you've already said that West Bengal has one of the worst situations as far as dues are concerned. It's a very strange
almost 2621 crore.
Yeah, and it's about 65 or 70% of the total dues. Wages due. That is what the answer in the Rajya Sabha was on 20th of July. So we calculated it was 65% of all wages due were owed to the people in West Bengal. And we haven't had a single wage payment since 26th of December 2021. So it's 9 months or 8 months rather, since people got paid for anything. Since a fresh payment was made, it's called an FTO. Since that was kind of passed by the central government, it's that many months. Now, the point is that this is standard. 16 to 17%, even 20% of the funds of every year are used to pay dues from the last year. So there's always this backlog kind of going on. But this year, it's very, very bad. And we organized a fact finding on this because we were in such a bad state, the West Bengal people, that we asked our different friends all over India to come and do a fact finding for us. And the fact finding results have shown that people want work, and they were desperate for work, but they've not got money, they've not got work, and the average amount of money that was owed to them was 3,000 to 8,000 rupees. Now, we're talking about a set of people who are in Bengali, you call them din aane din khaye. That means you work every day, you get your money, you buy your food and you eat, and then you go again the next day and work every day. It's like, a daily kind of thing. There's no surplus to fall back on. Now, for this kind of section of people, you have this 3,000 or 8,000 rupees per head left. And for 7-8 months. So you can imagine the kind of distress that is happening. And as I told you, there are a lot of women who depend on this money. So especially single women have reported to this fact-finding team that they often have to skip meals because of lack of money, non-payment of wages. Hmm. And of course, debt has also increased. So their loans from private lenders, from microfinance institutions, that has increased. Then, of course, there's obviously increased migration taking place, and people have started depending more on, sort of just. I mean, we've also had instances of begging also, where people have had to resort to that to kind of, because they have no other work available. And especially for women, it's very bad because they can't migrate also. So, and for single women or widows, it's that those they seem to be the worst impacted. This thing. But the other thing that is happening is NREG is not just work; it's also the creation of assets, and certain things really suffer because of that. For example, the fact-finding team went to Purulia and found a pond which was half dug. So, what is going to happen in 8-9 months is that pond is going to further deteriorate. And so this is also kind of an impact. And one of the worst things has been in the Sundarbans area, where NREGA money is used to make dikes every year, earthwork to kind of prevent flood water from coming in. I don't know if you're familiar with the Sundarbans, but it is prone to cyclones, prone to flooding, all that. It's a very sensitive area climatically, and it's very, very problematic in terms of climate change. It's being impacted. It's on the front line of climate change refugees kind of a thing. So now this area, because NREGA money has not been there, ponds have not been made, dikes have not been made this year. And I don't know if we can say we're lucky or unlucky. Whatever it is, there's not been enough rain this year. So we haven't had incidents of flooding. But we're still not over the worst. Generally, August, September, the worst months there. Cyclones occur at this time, and generally flooding also occurs at this time. So we still have to wait for that. And with these dikes not getting done, there's a likelihood of floods also now. This I'm talking about from West Bengal experience, because I'm very familiar with the situation here. But I'm sure similar things are happening all over India, where if you have this delay in payments and all this kind of stuff happening, people are going to get impacted in this way.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. I mean, the different parts of the country have different problems. So while West Bengal has especially the Sundarbans is prone to such cyclonic storms, there are parts of the country that are prone to drought. If you haven't dug your canals, if you haven't dug your ponds on time, obviously they're going to be impacted in many ways. That's an important point.
No, and yeah, NREG money is being used for the PM Awas Yojana. 90 days of NREG money is given under the PM Awas Yojana. I'm wondering what is happening to that in West Bengal. Because if those 90 days of work is not given, the PM Awas Yojana goes for a flop. If people have bought material and kept it, that goes for a flop. So it's like suddenly, stopping something which is half done. And that is definitely going to have a very, very bad impact on people's assets.
Yeah. It's quite curious that West Bengal payment has been withheld in such large measure. I mean, in your assessment, is it because there is a procedural issue at the West Bengal or the central end, or is it a political thing?
See, there is, we'd be the first people to say that there is corruption in West Bengal. We've been shouting about it for a long time. And our members are also quite upset by it, but very frightened to say anything in front of the ruling party leaders. You have this party dictatorship every time, whichever party there is, whether it's the left or the TMC now. So people are very frightened of the party. So they don't say anything in front of them. But there's tremendous discontent about corruption. So there is no doubt about that. But the point is that corruption is there in all over the country and in all kinds of situations. For example, if you look at the whole scam with NPAs, that is thousand times bigger than what has happened in NREG, the corruption in NREG. We haven't closed down banks because of that. So this particular thing of, or say Partho Chatterjee has stolen millions of crores of money from the school education department in terms of salt. So are we going to stop schools because of that? The logic of closing down money to West Bengal because of corruption is very strange, because it's not the officials who are suffering, it's the workers who are suffering. People have worked, they haven't got wages. And people who've stolen money, they're getting their salaries, everything is being, everything is hunky-dory for them, they're fine. They're just carrying on as usual. So this is very strange. And it's not even West Bengal, which is the only state which is corrupt. For example, in Jharkhand, this very famous Pooja Singhal or whatever her name is, from 2008 to 2011, she's supposed to have siphoned off some 28 crores or something of rupees from the Khunti, from one district. And the period during which she has siphoned off money, at one time the JMM was in power, at one time there was president's rule, after that there was BJP rule. So it's like it cuts across party lines, it cuts across states. This whole corruption issue. To stop workers' money because there is corruption is very strange. It sounds extremely, extremely unfair. The central government, firstly the act itself, and then successive state central governments have set up several mechanisms to deal with corruption. So they have a state employment guarantees. If I go down the line, there are about, like state employment guarantees council is there at the apex. Then you have an NREGA commissioner. Then you have the DM. Then you have the BDO. Then you have the Gram Panchayat. So you have those structures. Along with that, you're supposed to have an ombudsman in every district. Then you're supposed to have social audit going on. There's actually a department for social audit. And then there are fines which are given. There are, within the act, all that. So there's a whole structure to deal with corruption. That structure seems to be failing. It doesn't seem to be dealing with corruption. And we have had discussions with the Rural Development Department, where the Rural Development Secretary has told our representative that we found this corruption has been taking place for the last 3 years. So our thing is, if it was there 3 years ago, why don't you stop it right then? We can tell you it's been happening for the last 10 years. But when complaints have been made, nothing is being done. So why didn't you stop it right then? And, instead of leading us into a situation where you have to totally stop the act, stop the functioning of this entire scheme totally, trampling over people's rights, because it's their right to get work and it's their right to get paid in time under the law. That's what the NREGA Act says. So how can they justify this with this very elaborate system that they have of government? And then on top of that, the central government has been introducing different mechanisms. First, it was cash payment, then became post office accounts, then payment through banks, then master rolls, then e-master rolls. So and then now you have to take a photograph at the site. Then there was geotagging of the assets. So they've been trying to deal with corruption by using technology, but they just don't seem to be able to handle it. The people who suffer because of this are the workers themselves, not any officials, not anybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have been a bit long.
No, that's fine.
That's I think I got a bit passionate about it. That's
no, I think that kind of depth is no, that kind of depth is important. And but do you envisage demand for NREGA jobs to keep rising? If yes, why? And if no, why?
Yeah, so there are two sides to it. One is the whole situation of distress. I don't envisage any kind of plan by this government to stop distress, to kind of deal with distress, to deal with poverty. They don't think in that way. They seem to think in terms of the Ambanis and Adanis. They don't think in terms of common people. So distress will increase. Therefore, the need for NREGA and the demand for NREGA will increase. On the other hand, you have this very strong feeling, with this monument of failure kind of feeling, that this is a useless scheme. It's a waste of money. Despite the COVID, in the way in which it helped during COVID, despite the way in which it helped during demonetization, and how the way in which it's protecting people, central government seems to feel that it's not of any use. It's not in keeping with their development paradigm, the kind of idea they have of development. So they are going to kind of keep reducing money, keep putting in conditions, keep getting new things. Like now they're starting to say that if you want fresh money, you have to get us 50% of the money which has gone into corruption back. Only then we will give you fresh money. If you want money, then you have to take a photograph of workers twice in the day, which is very difficult for workers. They have to come once in the morning, do their work, go home, then come again. So this is, it's becoming more and more conditions are being imposed, and people are going to find it more and more difficult to kind of access the work. I don't know which one is going to really predominate. From what I've seen of what the government is doing right now, ultimately, I think they'll try and kind of, they plan to phase it out. They just want to kill it.
I was going to come to that actually. So let me actually, since you mentioned it, there is this very strong feeling that the government is not interested in continuing the scheme for political reasons. I think one of the reasons cited is that, they don't want to continue with anything from the UPA that has worked, because it also shows that was effective and what they are doing is ineffective. So what is your view about that?
I don't think it's as simple as that. It's not that UPA brought it in, so we will not use it. It's much deeper than that, in the sense that, first, this government definitely believes in a very urbanized model of development, does not believe in rural development, no matter how much of lip service they may give to it. And they definitely believe in a kind of, even more strongly than the earlier government, in a trickle down theory. Of getting the rich to be richer is what they seem to believe in. Ease of doing business, etc., etc. All this is very important to them. We never hear about the ease of people, just workers living. That we never hear about the ease of that. So if that is the way in which they look at things, then the sections that they want to cater to, which is basically of industrialists, of people who are in urban areas, of people who kind of make the wealth of the country, so to say, in terms of amassing wealth, they need cheap labor. And the only way in which cheap labor can be provided, cheap, unorganized labor, who will be, and if you look at even the way in which they're bringing change into the labor laws, they want a very flexible labor market. So the way in which they can do that is if there is rural distress and if people come to the cities, more and more, the pool of labor who want jobs becomes larger and larger. And people are desperate for work. NREGA acts as a protection against desperation. It gives people choice. They can stay at home, work at home, not go to the city, not go for low wages. There's some kind of a floor at which they can work if NREGA functions properly. But if NREGA doesn't function properly, then people are forced to go to city areas, and therefore the cheap supply of labor and the ready supply of labor is very much there. And I think this is what that government wants. So it's not as if UPA ka failure, our success. It's not that much. It's basically a way of saying we want cheap labor, we want a flexible labor market. NREGA acts as a problem in that. So let's get rid of NREGA. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, and cheap labor for our industrial friends. That's what he said.
Yes.
And Anuradha, there have been a lot of worker protests in Delhi and large protests for the payment of dues. So tell us about these workers. Who are these people who have gone there? What are they saying? And so on.
Okay. So there's something called the NREGA Sangharsh Morcha. Firstly, NREGA is actually the outcome of people's movements. And we were all together and we worked together on NREGA even before its inception for a long time, from starting from the late 80s. And this kind of picked up in 2004. And as a continuation of that, in about 10 years ago, or not less than 10 years, maybe 7-8 years ago, we formed something called the NREGA Sangharsh Morcha, which is a kind of federation of different unions and different people working on NREGA, NGOs, unions, all these people. So we were very active before COVID. We'd had a dharna in Delhi also. COVID obviously put a stop to everything. We did a few demonstrations, but nothing very much. And after COVID, we felt that we had to come together because the situation was getting very bad. So from on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of August, we organized this dharna in Delhi. So which was attended by people from about 12 states and it's very expensive going to Delhi. So there were not very many of us. There were 500-600 of us. And of course, we have to stay in Delhi and all those costs have to be met. So it's quite expensive for us. We're not like the farmers' movement. We don't have a lot of money. So we all came together in Jantar Mantar. And those 3 days, we did 2 or 3 things. One is we exchanged views and sort of everybody spoke and generally talked to each other. And we had a constant dharna going on. So we spoke there, all of us. The second thing we did was we went to meet MPs. So all the state people went to meet their own MPs. So we must have met about 30, 40 MPs and we gave them our charter of demands, all that, and told them that this what the problem was. The third thing we did was we went and met the Ministry for Rural Development. We met the Secretary for Rural Development. And unfortunately for us, while the MPs were positive, but one doesn't know where you're exactly going to go with them. The Rural Development Department was very negative, the Rural Development Ministry. And it became very clear to us that we have to basically get on the roads. And so we are going to be kind of carrying on with our movement. And there's going to be a national program again from 21st to 23rd September, where in each of our states, we are going to kind of do coordinated action. And like, for example, in West Bengal, even before that, people are having programs. Like in West Bengal, we have a protest on the 25th. So basically, and then we're also exploring, especially in West Bengal, we're exploring starting a court case on this because this whole issue of non-payment of wages is becoming totally, it's contravening the law as it is. So all this kind of work is going on. And this is what, basically in Delhi, this is what we did and this is how we came together. And this will continue. because we have felt that we're not going to be able to fix things by talking to the government. We have to start protesting about things much more and much more vigorously. And we'll also try and form alliances with other political parties, other trade unions, other organizations who are not part of the Morcha itself.
Right. So you've mentioned some of the problems. I mean, I think actually many of the problems that NREGA faces. You've mentioned the lack of payments. You've mentioned how it's getting more and more difficult to prove that you've actually done the work, whether it's geotagging or musters, etc., etc., etc. What are the other hurdles in implementation that the program faces?
One of the biggest problems is the wage level. One of the things that is happening is that the wage rate is deliberately kept low. So when the act was passed, there was a provision in the act which said you can pay either minimum wages, and this was something we fought a lot about at that time, but we were not able to get it through. We wanted a clause which says you have to pay minimum wages, so that workers would get at least some kind of surety of payment. But at that time, the government didn't agree to it, and Parliament also we were not able to pass it. But we did get a provision saying that you can pay minimum wages or a wage set by the central government. Now, what the central government has done is it has followed the second part, and it has started revising wages in a very ad hoc manner. So when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, at that time they set a 100 rupee wage one particular year, and since then they've been indexing it to that. And now what we find is generally the wages increase all over India. There's a different, every state there's a wage declared on the 1st of April. Every state we find that the wage, firstly, it's lower than the increase in wages is much less than the inflation rate. I think the only year when it was more was during the COVID wala year, 2021. And other than that, it's always lower. It's less, increases less than the inflation thing. And it's not the minimum wage. So you have this strange situation where the government, which is supposed to be the implementer of law and which is supposed to implement minimum wages, pays less than minimum wages. And this is kind of across the board in every state that is happening. So this is a big burden, a big problem, because workers are not so keen to work because wage levels are low. The other thing that is happening is the other implementation hurdle is the law asked for Gram Sabha meetings and budgets and things like that being decided to the Gram Sabha. It was supposed to be a decentralized way of functioning. That has been thrown out of the window. There is practically no consultation with the people. It's become a top-down scheme. It's no longer demand-based. And then, of course, I've already talked about, this. It was also supposed to be people's vigilance, people's, sort of social audit, all that. That has also been thrown out. So you don't have any accountability to the people, which I think accounts for a lot of the corruption. If they're allowed for people to be actively monitoring the scheme, it's such a huge thing. It's not possible for any central agency to monitor it. Then maybe this corruption would have been less. But that also they've thrown out. And then, of course, you have this in all the time you're having introduction of new laws, new conditions, not new laws, new rules, new conditions, all with the perspective of how to stop corruption rather than from the perspective of how to give people work. And this how to stop corruption is more or less an excuse because actually they don't even stop corruption in the process. So these are the kind of hurdles that we have in the implementation of the program. This is the kind of problems we're facing. Yeah.
Anuradha, the government has cut corporate tax, which will likely lead to a revenue loss of 1.8 lakh crore rupees. On the other hand, NREGA funding has been slashed significantly. How do you react to that?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that I can't show you anything visually. My friends in our campaign have made a very beautiful graph which shows that basically they've compared the MGNREGA budget allocation to the corporate tax revenue foregone. And the conclusion that they've come to is that if we were to stop foregoing this tax, we could actually double the expenditure on NREGA. So again, in Bengali, they say "teler mathay tel." Somebody who's already rich, you make them richer. So tax foregone is like that. Corporate tax foregone is like that. It's basically you're kind of helping your friends out who are already very rich. And in the process, you don't have enough money, or you say you don't have enough money to actually give people work. So it's a matter of priority and as to what they feel is important. And this government, obviously, I'm not saying even this government, even the last government used to do that they seem to feel that it's more important to give various kinds of concessions to corporates rather than to give people work. A very short-sighted kind of thinking, because this is not going to work for long. A democracy cannot exist If the poor people start getting poorer and poorer, and richer people start getting richer and richer, we've seen what happens with disparities, the kind of social discord that happens, the kind of misery that there is for people. So it's a very short term way of looking at things, but that's what they seem to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I keep saying, it's not that India is growing at 7 or 8%. It's, I think, 7% are growing at 70% rather than all
Yes.
of India.
Right, that's true.
So, what can be done now to for the program to make a better impact? What needs to change for it to achieve its original objective?
It's such a long wish list. Asghar, such a long, long wish list. But I don't know if any of it is going to come true. Very, very long list.
We
Anyway,
live in
let me
hope.
just. Yeah, we live in hope. Yeah. So this time, if you look at the slogans we placed in the dharna, that will give you an idea about how we see what is happening. A long, a very, very old slogan has been "Har haath ko kaam do, kaam ka pura daam do." So give everyone work and pay us properly for our work. So that is one thing which would help to kind of keep this thing going. The other thing is, which is a slogan that we did this year, which was NREG ke mazduri mein chori nahi, deri nahi. We don't want any theft in NREG wages, and we don't want any delay in the payment. So I would say, if you really want to keep this thing going, allocations have to be increased manifold, not manifold, but at least sufficient to kind of manifold. As soon as they manifold, I think planners are going to start getting scared. So let's not say manifold, but it has to be increased to like the figures that you were giving in the beginning, to about 1 or 2% of the GDP, if we want it to sort of survive. And one should stop treating people with so much of suspicion. People's participation, people's vigilance, people's planning, this should be encouraged through NREGA. Let's not treat the people of this country as being thugs and chores and all that, and yet the chores will carry on with their chores. So let's, so the planning by people is very important, and wage rates also have to increase. Then this delay in payment must stop. So technological fixes that they're trying, they should go a bit slow on these technological fixes. They're creating more problems than actually solving things. So as I said, the wish list can go on and on and on, but definitely increased allocations, proper payment of wages in the sense of stopping theft. These 2-3 things are very important. Proper wages, proper payment of wages, no delays in that, and stopping theft. These are very important if we want this program to survive.
So my penultimate question to you, Anuradha, tell us about your work. You've been working with all these workers. Tell us about that.
So, so that's a very bad question to ask somebody like me, because I could go on for 3-4 hours talking about it. So,
well, you did a fine job with that very wish list. You did it under 2 minutes, so I'm still embarrassed.
So I work in a trade union. I work in the trade union mode. I work with rural labor. We organize rural labor, and we also work amongst tea plantation workers. It's a kind of an extension of our work amongst agricultural workers, that we work amongst tea plantation workers. So actually, tea plantation workers take up a large amount of my time now. And we take up basically labor issues in terms of, like, for example, we've been part of the movement for NREGA since 1987 or 88, since we started our work actually. The first demand that we raised was for work, and that we want to stay in our villages, work in our villages, and we don't want to migrate. So that thing migration hasn't stopped though. We raised this demand so long ago, but we got NRG as a result of that struggle. Similarly, we've raised issues about the right to food, and the National Food Security Act was a result of that. In the sense that a number of organizations all over India, all of us got together for NREG as well as for the NFSA's struggle for the Food Security Act. Because hunger and unemployment are definitely very, very major problems for rural workers. We haven't done so much of work on land because for us in West Bengal, land redistribution has taken place to a large extent already because of the left front government earlier. So that was not a massive problem, but hunger and unemployment were very major problems. So we did that. And then we do a lot of work with women. And so we work on domestic violence, on issues concerning trafficking, things like that. And now at the present moment, we have a very, very strong anti-liquor movement. So if you look at the WhatsApp groups of which we are members, every day there are pictures of women marching to some 10, 15 women marching to some place in their village at night. and sort of bringing out bottles of liquor and throwing them away. So this is something that is posted every day in our WhatsApp groups. So this is the kind of work that I do, and we basically form committees in the village level, block level, so that people can take responsibility for their own work and for their own activities.
But here's a question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
Realize now it's become like an addiction. So now can't survive without this work. But like I started 41 years ago when I was 22 years old. And it was my way of saying that I don't like, the way in which society is functioning. I want to do something about it. So I kind of turned my back to whatever I was or whoever I was before that. And I started doing this kind of work. I went to a rural area and I started working. And but now, after so many years, it's become an addiction. I can't survive without. I lose direction if I don't do this. I don't know what to do with myself if I don't do this. So, and it's very rewarding in many ways. It's very frustrating, and you get one gets flack also from the administration, from other people. You get that also, but it's also very rewarding. For example, just now we formed an all women's union in one tea estate who have kind of thrown out all their corrupt leaders and said no. It's women's leadership that we're going to have. So that is very exciting to do that. The anti-liquor movement is very exciting. And what I've seen over this time is there's definitely been a change in the position of women. I remember when we went in 30, 40 years ago, women used to be in parda in some of the villages that we were in. But now women are out and working and kind of prominent in social life, political life, much more, I won't say very prominent, but much more prominent, much more active than they were earlier. That itself is rewarding because we've done a lot of work on gender and with women. So, yeah. So, sometimes one feels that we started off saying that we'll change society. Kya kiya? Kuch nahi kiya. In fact, sometimes one feels worse than what it was when we started work. But then one also thinks that, okay, if we hadn't done this, then maybe things would have been even worse than what they are today. So maybe we've acted in some way as a barrier to really, horrible things happening in society. And maybe we've kept some spark of good things alive somewhere.
Yes, you kept some spark of good things alive in society. And rather, thank you for helping us understand NREGA. It's a critical economic and I would say even social tool, and also what ails it.
Thank you, Ashraf. Thank you so much. There's nothing more I have to add.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINEER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.